Eden at School, a journey through curriculum and what it means to be a 21st century teacher. Eden had always enjoyed school. She had tons of friends and liked her teacher, but she always felt something wasn't quite right, but she couldn't place her finger on it. She thought she wasn't learning the most important things and that many important people and events were left out. Her friends couldn't help her with this, so she decided to ask her teacher, Mr. Griffin. Mr. Griffin was a first-year teacher, and Eden was one of his favorite students. He liked her comments about his lessons. So when Eden asked, "Why do you teach certain topics like Canadian history, but leave out First Nations? And I think some of this other stuff you teach is sometimes useless," he replied, "Well, that's curriculum." "What's a curriculum?" Eden asked. "There are many types of curriculum, and some of them are not always good. There is formal, hidden, null, lived, and place," answered Mr. Griffin. "It's quite complicated to teach them all in class." "Tell me about them," Eden stated. "Well, formal is what I have to teach whether I like it or not. Hidden is the things you learn, but I don't outright teach you them. Null is what I don't teach whether I know it or not. Lived is what you learn through experiences at school and at home. Place is what you are taught depending on where you live." Wow, that must be hard for you as a teacher. This is just the beginning of what teachers have to face every day. This profession is always changing. But so are the students. "I want to know more," Mr. Griffin chuckled. "A teacher's journey is never finished, but I can tell you what I know now." In the past, and honestly even today, we learn that and to teach students is made from the dominant perspectives, stated Mr. Griffin. "Well, that's not fair." "What about the First Nations? They're a part of our history too," exclaimed Eden. "I know. It's great that treaty education is mandatory in classrooms now. Hopefully these stereotypes and stigmas can be removed," replied Mr. Griffin. "You're really a great teacher, Mr. Griffin. I wish all my teachers would be like you," beamed Eden. "Well, I like to pride myself in being a teacher who is a researcher. I like to think of myself as a lifelong learner, but you will be taught by different types of teachers who view themselves as professionals or learned practitioners. Each of these types have advantages and disadvantages, but you will learn a great deal from them." "That is the goal for the 21st century teacher," responded Mr. Griffin. "A 21st century teacher sounds exciting. Can you expand on that?" "First off, they have the ability to use technology in the classroom. Before smartboards and computers, teachers had to rely on overhead projectors and textbooks. We now have all these tools to make teaching more accessible and easier to create lessons. You have the ability to collaborate with your students in your classroom and around the world. There are many tools we can use to create networks and learn, like Twitter, blogging, and other social media outlets. These seem like it could be overwhelming, and how can you control what your students are doing?" asked Eden. "Good question. And you're right. As a teacher, I need to address internet safety with my students. I want my students to use technology to better themselves in the world they are growing into." "You know what? There isn't a whole lot of lessons that talk about social justice issues in the world," thought Eden. "You're right. My goal is to address more of these issues in class. I want my students to become critical thinkers, even though curriculum has issues that are oppressive to students. Kumashiro talks about the common sense that is taught explicitly and implicitly to students. I also have to realize now that many of my students may come from poverty, so I have to make sure I don't put them at unease. Also, racism is still a major issue today within the media and text we read. I want to be the teacher that makes learning anti-oppressive." "This is a lot of content to teach and to be aware of," said Eden. "But now, where does a student fit in? How do you know that they're becoming critical thinkers?" asked Eden. "Another great question, but that's the thing with education. There is no agreement on what qualifies as a good student. There's only guidelines, but even the wording can be seen as oppressive. The goal of education is to be anti-oppressive. As the students become critical thinkers, teachers have to be as well. Writing a teaching philosophy helps us with deciding what we believe in. It was important for us and our students. Before talking to you, teaching always seemed like an easy job, with just following the curriculum, doing your lesson plans, and mark assignments and tests. But I was wrong. Hearing what you have been talking about makes me realize everything is interconnected and evolving. Education isn't the same as it used to be. People are realizing subjects, curriculum, and the way we teach is very oppressive. Technology is a huge part of our lives, so teachers need to be aware of its greatness and inappropriateness. Schools can't be a place where we are all filled with buckets of information and have no real-life application for it. Students need creativity and less structure because each student has different ways to show that they can be great students. There are also different kinds of teachers who teach in diverse styles. Also, Treaty Ed is a huge turning point in education that kickstarts anti-oppressive education into action. I'm glad that you have taken so much from this conversation. You're exemplifying the traits to become a great 21st century teacher. You're asking the hard questions and always wanting to learn more. Well, thanks to a great teacher, I've become more of a critical thinker, exclaimed Eden. They both laughed and carried on with their day. The end.